Microsoft Corporation today officially unveiled its Windows 95 computer program. From Newfoundland to New York and New Zealand, millions of computer buffs swarmed into stores to buy the software package that's described as the dawn of a new era in personal computing. But is all the hype really warranted?
Never has a piece of software been given such a hard sell. This guy's coming down the CN Tower, computer in hand. And that really is the Empire State Building bathed in Microsoft's corporate colors.
The fact is, Windows 95 is hardly a major technological breakthrough. What it is an improved operating system. That's the program that tells the rest of your computer what to do and allows you to run all your other programs. And that's really all it is.
You know, sometimes I ask myself, does Windows 95 really need an introduction? Because I'm of the opinion that its radical redesign, the taskbar, start menu, all that stuff, it's basically made Windows what it is today, in a sense. Microsoft had the courage, no, not that courage, to transition from the dated program manager to the fresh, innovative, and most importantly, user-friendly taskbar and start menu. A design so successful that it's practically remained a staple of Windows' user interface to this day. It also brought about many other changes, such as no longer needing to install MS-DOS before installing Windows, despite still being somewhat DOS-based, 32-bit application support, and long file names, just to name a few. Overall, Windows 95 is considered by many as one of the most important Windows releases yet. In this video, we're going to be installing the definitive update to Windows 95, OEM Service Release 2.5. This update brought about much needed features, such as support for the FAT32 file system, which means larger hard drives evidently, USB, which is not currently emulated in 86-box, but still a significant feature, and improved support for the Pentium MMX and P6 architectures, P6 being Pentium 2, Pentium Pro, and the like. The setup process in OSR 2.5 doesn't differ much from that of the original RTM release, and in the same vein, nor do the system requirements. We will also be installing Microsoft Plus for Windows 95, which includes extra themes, games, and other useful system tools and utilities. With all that being said, let's get started. Microsoft recommends a 486 processor with 8MB of RAM and at least 55MB of hard drive space. But if your computer can emulate a Pentium processor of at least 75MHz, I would say go for that instead. For this video, we'll be using 32MB of RAM and a 100MHz Pentium processor, 100/66, on the Socket 7 Asus P/I-P55 TP4XE motherboard. Apart from the stupidly long name, I like to call this board one of the Old Faithful, as it's a fairly reliable choice and has also been featured in our Windows 98 installation video. If you're wondering what the 50 or 66 at the end of each 100MHz Pentium processor means, that's the speed of the frontside bus, or FSB. It carries data between the CPU and memory controller hub. In essence, the faster the FSB, the faster the CPU can communicate with other components on the motherboard. The graphics card doesn't need to be anything too crazy if you're not going to game on this machine. Personally, the Diamond Stealth 64 VRAM, with 4MB of VRAM, has always been a solid choice for me, as it's capable of outputting true color at resolutions such as 1024x768 in Windows versions ranging from 3.11 to 9x. The goal of these installation videos is to provide a baseline for the required machine specifications so that you know what to expect when configuring a machine for a certain operating system, along with the setup process of said OS. If you ever wanted to start gaming on your machine, you could always opt for a different display adapter or CPU. This, among other reasons, is why we strongly encourage you to join our Discord server, where you can get recommendations from our community members on which parts to use, and also potentially make some friends in the process. As always, my mouse of choice is the standard PS2 mouse with 2 buttons. The Sound Blaster AWE32 plug-and-play is a great choice for a sound card, as some would consider it a Sound Blaster 16 on steroids. Leave all settings as is, except for the onboard RAM, which I generally recommend setting to 2 MB for best results. For the network card, look no further than the AMD PCNet PCI 2. Choose Slurp as the network type, unless you know what you're doing. In storage controllers, set the hard drive and floppy drive controllers to internal, and then create a hard drive of at least 1 GB, IDE channel 0:0, two 3.5-inch 1.44 MB floppy drives, and a CD-ROM drive at ATAPI channel 1:0 with 52 times speed. Turn on the postcard if you so desire, and we're ready to go. Okay, so after starting your newly created machine, you may know that one of the first things to do is to spam the delete key repeatedly to get to the BIOS. At least for this machine. First, go to standard CMOS setup and ensure that primary and secondary master are set to auto, setting primary and secondary slave to none. Then configure both floppy drives. Now, in the BIOS features page, the only thing you need to change is the boot sequence, which should be A CD-ROM C. Finally, in the PNP and PCI setup page, make sure that PNP OS installed is set to yes, as we are using a plug-and-play sound card. And that's it! Now, all you have to do before you exit is insert the special Windows 95 boot disk we'll be using, specifically the Windows 95B boot disk from allbootdisks.com into drive A, link in the description. Save all changes and reboot. Now, you should be booting into the floppy disk. Before we continue, I'd like to mention that the specific boot disk supports hard drives greater than 2 GB, so you have much more flexibility when it comes to hard drive sizes. However, depending on the boot disk you choose to use, you will see a few errors such as missing smartdrive.exe, an error in config.sys, etc. But those are normal as the hard drive in your machine has not been formatted yet. This is where you perform the all too common ritual of fdisk and format, the commands you have to use to partition and format your hard drive. Let's start with fdisk. Select create DOS partition or logical DOS drive, create primary DOS partition, and at that prompt, press enter. Reboot your system. Another boot disk specific thing is this. Just press A or F to get rid of it. Back at the command line, type in format C:/S to format the hard drive. And your hard drive is ready. Now you can insert your Windows 95 OSR 2.5 CD into the machine. Recall that this specific boot disk uses the R drive letter for the CD-ROM drive, so change your current drive to R and run dir/W to ensure that your CD-ROM is properly detected. Now, you could theoretically install Windows 95 from there by running setup.exe and all would be fine until you restart your machine post setup and realize that it chooses not to detect your CD-ROM drive, causing you to be unable to install necessary drivers after setup and then experience a myriad of problems afterwards. Trust me, this is not something you ever want to put yourself through. Fortunately, there's a workaround for that. Create a folder on your C drive called setup. Now, write this exact command to copy all the files from the Win95 folder on the CD to your hard drive. This is a temporary folder that you can safely delete after installation. Once that's done, go back to the CD-ROM drive and type in setup to start. Windows 95 setup is actually quite straightforward. Generally, you're prompted to select where you're going to install Windows, how many features you want to install, a serial number, some basic info about yourself, what hardware is installed, I usually check both of those boxes, and some more things along the way. If you choose custom in setup options, you will be prompted to select the features you want to include in your installation. I usually go with everything except for Windows messaging and Microsoft Fax since, well, Fax is not currently emulated. You could choose to set up your network adapter in the network configuration screen, but this is something that can be handled well after setup. Feel free to change anything here except for the workgroup. Once you're done, review your choices and the hardware that's set up automatically detected, and then click Next. Creating a startup disk is not necessary here, as the boot disk we use at the beginning serves the startup disk's purpose. And then some. Now, let's get to installing. During installation, setup will sell you on all the features and advantages that Windows 95 has to offer over the likes of 3.1 and MS-DOS, as is the case with the versions that followed suit. But by now, we're aware of how 95 revolutionized the market, and file copying needs no user interaction, so let's just skip to the end. Now that this part of setup is complete, remove any bootable media from your drives and restart your machine. You know, this is definitely not the first time I've installed Windows 95. You will now be greeted by a screen that prompts you to enter a username and password. Afterwards, setup will detect and install the drivers for your hardware. Oh, there's that error again. But this time around, instead of r:/Windows 95, enter the temporary folder you created with the setup files, in this case, c:/setup. And everything should be fine from there. Those look like networking related files. Very important. Now we reach the final part of setup before we get to use Windows 95. After setting up things like the control panel, Windows help and such, you get to choose your time zone and optionally set up a printer. We'll be covering printing in a future video. And we're done. After this reboot, we should be booting into Windows 95. Actually, let me kill the music for this one. This is it. The Windows desktop. As you can tell, sound works fine and the display drivers work, as you can tell by the slightly darker shade of teal you get compared to the basic VGA display driver. Now let's go ahead and increase our display resolution. Right-click on the desktop, select Properties, go to the Settings tab, and start by changing the color palette to True Color 32-bit and increasing the desktop area. You will notice that the color palette stays at True Color until you go to 1280 by 1024. With the built-in display drivers, this display adapter will go as far as 1024 by 768 at True Color, so let's keep it that way. Also, setting a monitor is not necessary. Now, a restart isn't exactly required, but let's proceed to remain on the safe side. You will notice that this only restarts Windows and not the entire machine. It's somewhat akin to exiting Windows 3.1 and then running win.com again. Except that's kinda what it does. As you may have noticed earlier, Windows successfully detected our Sound Blaster AWE32 sound card and has built-in drivers for it. You could also install the software and driver CD that Creative provides, which includes additional drivers for the sound card and a variety of sound-related utilities. It also includes Real Player.
Welcome to Real Audio 2.0 from Progressive Networks.
Does anyone Does anyone even remotely remember that? There isn't much to do here. Select full installation when prompted, let the software install, add this one line to the system.ini file, don't worry about text-OLE, and then restart your computer when the process is complete. Now that we're done with the sound and display part of setup, it's time to spice things up by installing Microsoft Plus for Windows 95, which can be found on the same CD-ROM. Simply open the CD-ROM, click on the Plus folder, and start setup from there. Don't worry about the serial number here, as it is truly one to remember. Microsoft Plus for Windows 95 included a plethora of features, utilities, and quality of life improvements that overall enhanced the Windows 95 experience, including the world-renowned classic game 3D Pinball. And desktop themes, of course. Do you miss themes in Windows? Let us know down in the comments. It is worth noting that some of the tools included in Microsoft Plus, such as Drive Space and Internet Explorer, are already present in OSR 2.5. System Agent is what is now known as Task Scheduler and is not something to worry about. We'll go through the desktop themes once we restart our computer. Back at the desktop, you'll notice a few things have changed. Primarily the icons. If you go to Display Properties as we did earlier, and then go to the Plus tab, you can change the icons of certain apps as well as change some visual settings, such as using bigger icons, stretching your wallpaper to all edges of the screen, which is available in all Windows versions going forward, and other notable enhancements. To change the desktop theme, go to Settings in the Start menu, Control Panel, and then select Desktop Themes. You have a variety of themes at your disposal, such as Leonardo da Vinci, animals, computers, very Windows-focused themes, and more. Oh, and they come with their own sound effects. That's not something we see or hear anymore nowadays, is it? Now let's get online with this Windows 95 machine. Or at least attempt to. We can always start by double-clicking on this internet icon here. Click Next, click Manual. Okay, Internet Setup Wizard, use a local area network. No, I didn't install messaging. No, I'm not using a proxy, let alone 7. And... well, shit. I knew this was gonna happen. So Windows 95 OSR 2.5 ships with Internet Explorer version 3 pre-installed, which is not exactly ideal, but hey, a browser is still a browser. It turns out we actually have to configure TCP/IP to get online. Not exactly a shocker. Go to Control Panel, click on Network, Add, Protocol, select Microsoft as a manufacturer and TCP/IP as a protocol. In the Network Components list, find the TCP/IP protocol that is linked to our network adapter and then click Properties. In the DNS Configuration tab, set any name as the host and then add the IP address 10.0.2.3 to the DNS Server Search Order list. In the Gateway tab, add the IP address 10.0.2.2 to the list. Leave the IP address tab as is. Once you're done, click OK and you'll be prompted to restart your machine, which you definitely should do. Back at the desktop. Let's try opening Internet Explorer again. Okay, see, there's the issue. I'm sure this Microsoft website doesn't exist anymore, and there are practically zero Microsoft websites that will work on such an ancient Internet Explorer version in the current year. Let's try Google. Okay, that's something alright. At least now we're online. If you have any doubts about your machine being connected to the internet, you could always go to the MS-DOS prompt and run the ping command with an address like google.com. If it resolves to an IP address, then you're fine. Now it's time to update to the latest version of Internet Explorer that works on Windows 95, being version 5.50. But not before we throw in another substantial quality of life improvement. Internet Explorer version 4 introduced Active Desktop, or better known in the installer as Windows Desktop Update, which, if installed on Windows 95 or NT 4.0, would upgrade the Explorer interface to a more user-friendly one. However, due to several legal concerns over anti-competitive practices, this option was removed from newer versions of Internet Explorer, which is why we'll be installing IE4 before version 5.5. IE4 setup is relatively straightforward. It's actually bundled with the Windows 95 OSR 2.5 CD, so you could go ahead and install it from there, but we'll be using a standalone copy for this video. Link in description. When opening the IE4 CD-ROM, double-click on the executable called IE4 Setup. Select Full Installation, select Yes when prompted to install Windows Update, or else we would have gone straight to 5.5. Select your country of residence, check the installation directory, and let it do its thing. Okay, not everything will install for some reason or another, but thankfully Microsoft Front Page Express is just an extra. Simply click OK and restart your computer. Back at the desktop, you will notice a few things have changed, namely the wallpaper, which is now black with a sidebar at the top left corner. Man, nothing screams more 90s USA than this. If you open my computer now, you will notice a significant change. Windows Explorer just looks a lot cleaner, more user-friendly, and a bit similar to that of Windows 98, which is way better than just using a box with things in it, I guess. Right, now let's install Internet Explorer 5.5. Setup doesn't differ much here, just click on IE5 Setup, select Install Now, and you're basically done. So what else can you do with Windows 95, especially in 2024? Okay, well, besides that, there are quite a few pieces of software you can install to enhance your Windows 95 experience. The latest version of Firefox that still works on Windows 95 is version 1.5.0.12, released in 2007. It's much more bearable than Internet Explorer, I'll give it that, and supports some form of encrypted browsing, but I wouldn't entirely rely on it. Office 2000 is the last version to officially support 95 and surprisingly still works for most people's needs. It's almost as if software like this never ages. You simply can't beat what is now a 20-plus-year-old Office suite for most tasks. Like, it just works. DirectX version 8.0 is the last version that works on 95. And while I don't know of any games that would take advantage of said version off the top of my head, I did manage to get games like Tomb Raider 1 and Quake, my all-time favorite, running just fine on Windows 95. Although, again, I would recommend using a better display adapter paired with a Voodoo 1 or 2 if you would actually want to game on this machine. Let me know in the comments if I should look into games that work with Voodoo cards. And last but definitely not least, IRC. IRC is essentially the grandfather of Discord in a few ways, and we do maintain our own IRC network, which is linked to our own Discord server. MIRC remains a solid choice for IRC clients on old operating system, if you don't plan on connecting with SSL, that is. Version 6.35 is reportedly the last version that works on Windows 95. And of course, we have the classic. There's a lot that can be said about Windows 95, even as it is nearing its 30th anniversary. The new design language it introduced persisted in some way or another through modern Windows as we know it today. The taskbar, start menu, long file names, not even mentioning the countless improvements under the hood. All of those marked a new beginning for the operating system that would soon to be a household name. Along with that, the OSR 2.5 update, despite being distributed exclusively to OEMs and only available on newly purchased computers, added several key features that made Windows 95 a solid operating system for beginners and professionals alike. But despite all the solid reception and subsequent improvements, Windows 95 was still fundamentally flawed. Do recall that despite being vastly different from its predecessor, Windows 3.1, it's still somewhat based on MS-DOS. As you saw earlier, after rebooting into DOS mode, you could still return to Windows by just typing win.com. Just like old times. DOS as a whole was aging quite badly, and this is something that Microsoft noticed early on and decided to remedy, at least at the enterprise level, with something that looked quite similar but was a completely different beast from the inside. Windows NT version 4.0 up next. Thank you for watching, and as always, happy emulation.